Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and today it's my great honor to be joined by Richard Ross of the Steinhardt Aquarium. For those of you who don't know Richard, he is a biologist for the Steinhardt. He spent years taking care of that huge reef tank they have. Richard, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, this is a fantastic honor. I've been watching your stuff on YouTube for years and following everything you do. It's amazing stuff. So before we really get into it, why don't you kind of tell me what you're doing today? Because I know your role has changed a little bit with the Steinhardt.
What I'm doing? So my position at the Steinhardt is changing. I'm going to be more focused on the coral spawning work that we've been doing there with Rebecca Albright's lab. So I'm going off of full-time aquarium keeping person at the Steinhardt and going to more of a part-time making just focusing on the coral spawning and one other system as well that we need for the spawning. And I'm also going to pursue a higher degree with Rebecca. So that's kind of my focus is now, after 10 years, moving away from displays to what science can we really be doing to impact the world? Because what's going on to the reefs is a big deal, and if I've got a skill set that can be helpful, I should be using it for that.
That is the most amazing thing. I am just wish I could do that kind of work. That is amazing you can do that.
Thanks. It's a bizarre chain of events that has led me to be able to be in this spot. So I'm pretty fortunate, and I feel pretty good about the whole situation.
So the big topic we want to cover today is water quality, and I would think who better to ask than you. So let's kind of get going on water quality. Richard, on your tank, what kind of water quality parameters are you keeping?
Well, on the home system, which is 150 gallon display, and then another couple hundred gallons of stuff in a secret home lab, I care most about salinity, and after that I care about alkalinity, and after that I care about temperature, and then everything else.
That's cool.
Everything else is really kind of catch as catch can as you can go. I've been very interested in phosphates recently. Not recently, but in testing phosphates recently. The tank, you'll see in the video, Scott, my tank's behind me. It's traditionally run at really high phosphates, like 2, not 0.2, but 2.
Oh, wow, that's really high.
Yeah, and it's a thriving mixed, unless I kill it again. It's a thriving mixed reef. It's dominated by SPS on the top and dominated by NPS on the bottom. And phosphates have never seemed to really been a problem. So I became more interested in that and just left it alone, running high, with the idea of why should you change anything if it's working? And there's some articles and some videos about that floating around if anybody has more questions, or I'm happy to answer more questions about that. But I became interested in ways to control the phosphate and didn't matter. So I bought a Hawk DR890. I talked with Craig Bingman about what's the best way to test for these kinds of things. And so, I didn't buy the 900. I bought the 890 because you can get the 890 on eBay. Yeah, it's $300 or $400, right? Yeah,
that's a pretty high-end tester.
Yeah, but okay. So think about it this way, though. So $400 for a piece of testing equipment that's really only testing nitrite that I'm using for nitrate and for phosphate. But think of all the rest of the money that I've spent on test kits and sending my tests out over the years to test those two parameters. And with that in mind, it kind of feels like to me that amount of money as an investment isn't that much. It's never going to die. It's probably it's going to work for a long time. It's really robust, and it gets me. More importantly, it gets me results that I believe more than I believe other testing results. So it depends on what you're doing. If I wasn't intentionally trying to bring the phosphate down on a crazily high phosphate tank, I probably would not have bought it. But since I was interested in both of those things, it's well worth the investment. And I also don't think that's much of an investment given how much money we spend on our tanks. It seems like a lot, but I think most people, even for a small, like a 30 BioCube, if you went and put together all what you've spent on it, I think you'd be unhappy and realize that a $400 piece of testing equipment is not that much if you're interested in those tests.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I completely see your point. It makes a lot of sense. So you're using a really high-end test kit for that. You also mentioned alkalinity and some other parameters. How are you testing for those?
Currently, right now, I had one. Right now, for alkalinity, I'm just using drops. You know, 1 drop is 1 DKH because I'm not trying to do anything super fine tuning on that. I'm just trying to get a general gauge, which is mostly what I'm doing with most testing. I want trends rather than believing that this result is matters so much. I'm looking for how the trend is moving. So for alkalinity, I'm just doing drops right now. I had for a long time one of the prototypes for Jim Welsh's alkalinity monitor, and then we had to send that back because that's how the process goes. But that was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to getting another alkalinity monitor whenever the Trident comes out. I think is the one I'll go with because I'm all Apex set up here. Because that you can learn a lot from that kind of accuracy and precision and frequency of testing. It just brings about some really interesting trends, like the alkalinity dips during the day as it gets used up, and the alkalinity goes up more at night as it's not being used as much by the coral. So it's a very there's going to be some really interesting data that comes through from everybody as more of these alkalinity testers get out there.
So you sound like you're not so much worried about nailing a number and much more following the trends and actually seeing what's working in your tank.
Oh, for sure. I think the numbers, to a large extent, are made up. You know, it's where did the 0.05 from phosphate come from? You know, someone thought.
Absolutely.
Someone thought this is pretty close to natural. This is maybe what we should shoot for, but no one really cared about phosphate so much until we could test for it, and then they didn't care so much about what the test said until we had a way to control it. So as soon as we got GFO came on the scene, then all of a sudden phosphate became something people cared about so much.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and before that it was nitrate. Remember, before phosphate, nitrate was the devil, and we had to stop nitrate at any cost. And then as soon as we could test phosphate, people kind of stopped caring so much about nitrate. The nitrate in this tank behind me goes anywhere from 50 to like 120. And
oh wow!
I'm not sure if I should care about that either because it all seems to be working. So there. So yeah, I don't. And then
it's amazing.
Let's talk about test kits just in general, though. They all have a nice, a range of accuracy, a plus or minus, right? And you've got So thinking that any test or test kit is giving you both accurate and precise readings is kind of a hard pill to swallow. I mean, just look at a good refractometer. It's plus or minus 2 parts per thousand. So
which is quite a bit, actually.
It's huge, right? And let's not even get into temperature. So if you're reading 35, it could be 37, or it could be 33, or it could be 35.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So I only want to use it for trending.
Sure.
All of the numbers. How accurate does it need to be? What precision do we need? And let's talk about magnesium. The plus or minus on the magnesiums is like 100 or 150 parts per thousand.
Oh wow, that's a lot. I didn't realize they're that far off.
So take a look, and if I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong.
No, I
could be wrong about that. I don't think I am. But that's a huge. So at the Academy, whenever we got a test kit that came back with high magnesium or low magnesium, it was like, well, let's see what next week's is. Because number one, there's no way it changed this much in a week, since the last test. And number two, we know that there's a big margin of error in the test, so we really just want to look at it trending. And then you go look at your animals, do they look okay? And if they look okay, you're probably doing things right. I do care about magnesium, I do care about calcium, although there's not much I think we could do with either of those. If the magnesium's low, I think it's easy enough to adjust. Same with the calcium, although with a calcium reactor and water changes, it doesn't seem to come up that calcium is a problem anymore. It's just something we can test.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other than that,
so you mentioned. Oh,
yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say you mentioned you were also sending tests out in the mail. Tell me a little bit more about mailing stuff out and why you were doing that, because this is really interesting.
So when it first got noticed that my tank was ridiculous in nitrate and phosphate, and I had talked to a few other people, we realized we wanted more data. So testing became important. So at the time, we had one person at the academy that was doing our water testing. So I was very thrilled with that. One person whose job it is to do the tests. Because if you have two people, because as people do the tests differently. And the whole point of any lab that does testing is to do it the same way every single time, right?
Absolutely.
And that should be the same for us as well. We try to do it the same way every single time, which is yet another reason why comparing different tests results to each other can be weird. You have to know the quality of the people doing the tests. So anyway, we had this guy, Vaughn, who was doing all the tests. So I was very comfortable in his results. He did it the same way every time, and his results were consistent. And when they were not consistent, either there was a reason they were not consistent, or on retest it turned out that they were consistent. So that was wonderful to have that resource to know that it was getting tested. But that's not enough just to have Vaughn's test, the one test we were getting from the academy, not the one test, but the suite. So at the time, there wasn't much out there, and Aqua Medic water testing was there. So I started sending water to them, which was great. And, I make the assumption that the tests they're done the same way, and they're done. That's all. That everything is done the same way every time, even if it's by different people, because it's a lab, and you would have the equipment that makes that easier, right? So you have titration devices and mixers and all that kind of stuff. So even though I'm sending it out to somebody else and somebody else is doing it, I have a belief that they're doing it in a way that's consistent. And I found that everything I've done to check the Aqua Medic testing, it's always seemed to come back consistent. So I'm very happy with that. You get outliers here and there, but it's great. And I like that you can buy a bunch of different tests at the same time. It does like the regular one does 13 parameters, and so I have the test kits or the sample kits sitting around, and whenever I feel the need to send one in, I just send one in, and the turnaround on it's pretty quick, about a week. So yeah, I've been pretty happy with that. I also did some of the ICPs as well. I wrote an article about that with Chris Malpin, and we have some concerns about the ICP, but in general, I think for ballparking what's going on, they're fine too. The thing I'm having with the ICPs now is the turnaround time is so long on them that they're useful for checkups, but not for really spot checks or for helping me get a consistency, unless I'm willing to spend the money to send them once or twice a month to be able to get some real kind of trend lines from their results. But it seems cost prohibitive for that at this point.
Now, my understanding is with ICP that they don't test for things that are really important, like nitrates.
Yeah, it's a different kind of test. So some of the ICP places, I think, are testing for some of the organics as well now. I don't know how they're doing that. They're probably just doing it with some test kit that they like. And on all of these, the transparency to how the tests are being done is important. So like for Aqua Medic water testing, I know it's hawk tests, which makes sense given the locations. And so hawk's a good test.
Absolutely, they are. Yeah.
So and I'm pretty sure when I started doing this, I communicated and found out what they were actually using. They were very forthcoming, which was great. It's like, okay, so now I know what I'm getting. Except for ionic calcium. I'm still confused about what that's supposed to be, but we'll leave that alone.
I'm not sure about ionic calcium either.
We're just going to ignore that. So it seems great, and I know what they're doing. On these other places, some of the other places that I've looked into, it's hard to get answers, And so for me, when it's hard to get answers about what's being done, it's hard for me to go, yeah, well, this is a thing we should all trust. Because
Absolutely.
I don't know what's happening. So at least with the at least sounds like we're settling, but I don't mean it like that way. With the Aqua Medic testing, we know what we're getting, and that's worth something to me.
Absolutely. So you're getting your own trends when you're taking, I assume you're getting trends with the Aqua Medic water testing and comparing them, and you're using that information to run your tank?
Yeah, I'm not using the Aqua Medic stuff that often anymore. It's more of a checkup, and because I trust it, I trust it as a checkup.
Sure.
But you know, most of the tests I'm doing is really just phosphate and nitrate when I care, when I'm paying attention. When I'm trying to adjust them because I'm an idiot and I'm going to risk my entire tank by changing something. But other than that, I'm really looking at alkalinity and temperature and salinity. Those are really the three that I care about. Everything else...
I was going to ask you, and I haven't heard anything about pH yet. What do you think about pH? Is it as important as we all think it is, or...?
pH is important, but you can't do anything about it.
That's very true, yeah.
You can't add any buffers because they deplete very quickly, and then you're bouncing the pH all over the place. So there's really only two things you can do for pH. One is bubbling outside air into your sump or into your skimmer, which will impact your pH, or using a CO2 scrubber on the intake to your skimmer, right? Or
I see, that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Right, that's in the winter when everything's closed and you've got heaters on, or in the summer when everything's closed.
When the air conditioning's on, yeah.
So, and that's usually just going to drop your pH, and that your pH drops because of the CO2 in the air, right? And so you replace that with air from outside, and you off-gas the CO2, and you get better pH. But even in the closed-up houses, you're getting like 7.8 pH, or at least that's what it's showing on your kit. I'm not really that worried. We see it sometimes 7.6 out in the field. So, you know, corals adapt very well to stable conditions. So if your pH is going to go down, you know, in the winter because your house is closed up, but comes back up in the summer, you're probably fine. I have yet to see anything that convinces me that bringing your pH up from 7.8, 7.9 to 8.1, 8.2 really makes a huge difference. So I would encourage anybody who wants to do that to keep careful records about what's going on and observations about the tank, so we can see if it's really useful, or if it's just something we do because we're chasing a number.
Sure. And I noticed that you had temperature above calcium on your list. Tell me why temperature is so important and kind of where you like to keep it.
I like to keep temperature around 78, 79 degrees. I think that's a Fahrenheit. I think that's a nice kind of in the middle number. You know, between 75 and 83 or 83 and a half, where we would see it naturally. I've tried bumping it up, but I think that also allows or helps pathogens to metabolize faster. So it's good for the corals, but it's also good for the bad guys. Okay, yeah. And it seems, and this is all anecdote, and to me it also seems that at 78, just things are stable. It's like salinity. I'm looking for 34.5 or 34 because not only does that take into account whatever testing aberrations are going on, but it gives me a swing in two directions in case something goes bad.
See, that makes a lot of sense. I like that.
So thank you. So I think that's important. And
yeah, absolutely.
With calcium, you're just not getting that. You know, I'm not gonna. Something ridiculous would have to happen for me to get a massive calcium swing. They just kind of don't happen unless you do something.
Right, dose too much or something like that.
Yeah, or you do a big water change, or you don't do a water change long enough, or your calcium reactor goes goofy, or, you know, any of those things. But those are things that I just don't see as for the way my tanks work, that's not something I need to really keep on top of. And also, what the difference between 390 and 420, who cares? I mean, people care.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know why they care. Unless you're going to be really on top of everything and you're trying to really chase a number and keep all the numbers chased all the time, I only care about really trending and making sure things are on track. God, I don't even know. Chasing the numbers like that seems just so much work for so little payoff to me. Some other that's me. Of course, I don't need the caveat that that's what I think, because it's me and I said it. But yeah, I think chasing numbers for the sake of chasing numbers does you no good at all, and you'd be better off figuring out how to chase numbers in a way that makes some kind of reasonable sense. So understanding why you're chasing the number instead of just chasing the number.
So my understanding is our current numbers are pretty well based on what natural seawater is at. And I've always wondered if there were conditions that coral would do better under than just natural seawater. I mean, human beings evolved for the plains of Africa, but if you dropped me off, I would be dead in a day. Right. I just wouldn't make it. So is there anything that you're seeing that is maybe beneficial to a coral that we're not seeing in natural seawater?
Well, the question is, what does beneficial really mean? So we'll get back to pH.
Sure.
At higher pHs, it seems like, Rebecca just did a paper about, she took a section of Reef and put it back to the pH that it would have been pre-industrialization. And things metabolize faster and better, like 15% better. So,
oh wow, that's significant.
Well, that's true. How much is it worth chasing a higher pH in your system?
That's true.
What return are you getting? What's your return on that investment? And so, for me, it was very easy to put a Sweetwater air pump outside and pump a bunch of air into the sump, and that raised my pH, and now I'm done. Inexpensive, easy, doesn't take much maintenance, worth it to me. Having to change, the CO2 absorbing media once a week it will make me insane, and I'm just not going to do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And besides that, I don't think it shows much of a difference in what most of us are doing with our tanks at home. Corals, you talked about the numbers we used. It depends on where that number came from. Is that a surface sample? Is that where was that sampled? Is that an average of samples? Is it over coral reefs? Is it over open water? So all of those numbers are different depending on where you take the test.
I guess I never thought about that. I mean, different depths, different areas are going to change.
Yeah. When we were trying to figure out parameters for the big tank at the Academy, we had lots of discussions about which formula of seawater we were going to use. Not which formula, which reporting from nature we were going to use.
Oh, wow.
Because it made a difference. And if you're going to aim for something, you might as well aim for what you really want. Because if you're using numbers from the open ocean, it's different. So there's that. All of those numbers, and if you look at all those numbers, and even numbers taken from the same kinds of areas on different reefs, you're going to get different numbers. So corals do really well in a wide variety of test results, of parameters, but that's a small window in that wide variety, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
You don't want to go super out of it, but since we're talking about pH, 7.8 to 8.5, that's a pretty decent slice to play around in.
It sounds like you have a real smart view where you're trying to stay closer to the middle so you have buffer on each side.
Right. Until we have ways to precisely and accurately test easily, constantly, and then ways to change those outcomes, all of the testing and all of the work is you're kind of just chasing your tail. because of what we've talked about before, you know, the margin of error and things like that. So for me, you really just want to look at trend lines. Is everything in the tank happy? If it looks happy to you, great. Why change anything? And if you're going to change something, change one thing carefully and keep notes and observations so you know what's going on. And we can begin to answer these questions. You know, do people see a real difference in their corals if the pH is 8.3 rather than 8.1? I suspect not so much. 7.9 to 8.3 maybe. So
sure.
And you know, and it depends on what you're keeping. So, you know, if you're keeping a softy tank, I'm not going to worry so much about any of it. You know, if keeping an SPS tank, you want to be more on top of it. But again, I think stability is the key. Once you're in that slice of parameters that we find acceptable, keeping it stable, everything seems to do just fine.
So it sounds like if there's a main takeaway from this whole thing, it's try to be in the middle and try to keep it stable. That really seems like the most important part.
I think that's really good advice for the bulk of hobbyists. I think those of us who live and breathe this stuff all the time end up talking about hobbyists that are spending more time and resources and energy into their systems and playing with the cutting edge of what we know makes sense for them. I think for most people who want to tank and have some nice corals, just get in the ballpark and you're probably okay.
Well, Richard, that's some really great advice, and thank you so much for being on the channel today. I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard. It was great.
Right on, Scott.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
Peace.